The first face I saw when I came out of anesthesia was not my husband's. It was a hospital social worker named Glenda Briar, holding a clipboard, with the particular tight expression of a woman who has been asked to deliver news she does not want to deliver. She said, "Mrs. Cooper, are you alert enough to talk?" I said yes. She said, "Your husband asked me to give you this." She held up a manila envelope. The envelope had been sitting on her clipboard for 90 minutes, she told me later, because the surgical team had refused to let her wake me up to deliver it. The envelope contained a petition for divorce. The filing date was that morning. The morning I was lying on a table in an operating room 3 floors below, having my left kidney removed and surgically transplanted into my husband's brother. I had been in surgery for 4 hours and 26 minutes. My husband had used those 4 hours to drive to the courthouse, file and leave. The brother who now had my kidney was 3 rooms down the hall, recovering. He did not know yet, or so I thought. I would learn in the days that followed that he had known for 6 weeks. Welcome back to Broken Relations. If this is your first time here, we tell stories about families, boundaries, and the quiet moments that change everything. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, and let's get into it. My name is Vera Cooper. I am 39 years old. I had been married to Brendan Cooper for 11 years on the morning of the surgery. We had no children. We had a small ranch house on a street called Whitlow Drive, a black lab named Beckett, and a kitchen with a window that looked out at a lilac bush my mother-in-law had planted the spring after our wedding. Brendan was a regional sales manager for a medical device company. I was a freelance editor specializing in academic textbooks. I worked from a small home office that had once been a sunroom. I had spent 11 years in that office editing manuscripts about civil engineering and applied mathematics, and I had thought for most of those 11 years that I had a quiet, ordinary, decent marriage. Brendan's brother is Lawrence. Lawrence is 42. He is 3 years older than Brendan. He is divorced. He has 2 children from his first marriage who live with their mother in another state. Lawrence had been diagnosed with end-stage renal disease 4 years before my surgery. He had been on dialysis for 2.5 of those years. He had been on the kidney transplant waiting list for 19 months. He was at the point in the disease where the dialysis itself was becoming dangerous to his heart. Brendan came to me in the kitchen on a Sunday morning in February. He was crying. He was the kind of man who almost never cried, and when he did it quietly with his hands over his face. He said, "Vera, Lawrence's nephrologist called yesterday. The match they were waiting on fell through. He's running out of time. They want to do live donor testing. I'm not eligible. Mom and Dad aren't eligible. He doesn't have anyone else." I said, "What are you asking me?" He said, "I'm asking if you would consider being tested. I'm not asking you to donate. I'm asking you to be tested. If you're not a match, that's the end of it. If you are, we can decide together." I said, "Brendan, I'll be tested." I was tested the following week. I was a remarkable match. The transplant coordinator, a calm woman named Dora Nguenya who had worked in transplant medicine for 23 years, told me on the phone that I was, in her words, a match like a sister. She said it was unusual but not unheard of. She said the surgery, if I chose to proceed, had a strong probability of success. I want to pause here for a second. There is a particular weight that comes with being told you are a near-perfect match for somebody who is dying. It is not a weight you can put down. You can decide not to donate. That is a real and legitimate choice. But the weight of having been a match does not go away. You carry the knowledge for the rest of your life. I knew that, sitting at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand. I knew that even before I gave Brendan an answer. I told Brendan that night. I said yes. He cried again. He held me for a long time. He said, "Vera, I don't know how to thank you." I said, "You don't have to thank me. He's your brother. He's family." Brendan said, "He is family. He is. Thank you." We met with the surgical team in March. We met with the psychiatric evaluator in April, which is part of the live donor protocol, to confirm that I was donating freely and without coercion. The evaluator was a kind man named Dr. Iqbal who asked me 32 questions over the course of 2 hours. One of the questions was, "Vera, has anyone in your life pressured you to do this, or made you feel that the relationship would be damaged if you did not?" I said, "No. My husband cried when he asked me to be tested. He has been clear that I do not have to do this. I want to do this. Lawrence is family." Dr. Iqbal nodded. He wrote something down. He said, "That is a clear answer. Thank you. I will think about that question for the rest of my life." The surgery was scheduled for the second Wednesday in June. I took on no editing work for the 6 weeks leading up to it. I focused on getting my body ready. I walked 4 miles a day. I ate vegetables. I went to bed at 10 o'clock. Brendan took 2 weeks off work to be with me through the recovery. My mother flew in from Tucson 3 days before the surgery. She stayed at our house. She slept in the guest room. She made me chicken soup in advance and froze it in single-serving containers because she had read that recovery from a kidney donation involved a lot of soup. The night before the surgery, Brendan and I sat on the back porch. Beckett was at our feet. The lilacs were past bloom but still green and full. Brendan put his hand on my knee. He said, "Vera, I want you to know something. Whatever happens tomorrow, I love you. I want you to know that." I said, "Brendan, nothing is going to happen tomorrow except that Lawrence is going to wake up with a working kidney and I am going to wake up sore. Stop worrying." He said, "I love you." I said, "I love you too." We went to bed at 9:30. He held me until I fell asleep. The next morning, he drove me to the hospital at 4:45. My mother came in a separate car so she would have transportation home if Brendan stayed late. We checked in. I was admitted by 5:30. They put me in a pre-op gown. They started in 4. They walked me through the surgical timeline one more time. The surgical nurse, a woman named Bethany Sundstrom, asked me one final time if I was donating freely. I said yes. She said, "Mrs. Cooper, you are doing a beautiful thing. I will be with you the whole time." Brendan kissed me on the forehead at 6:15. He said, "I'll see you when you wake up." The last thing I remember before the anesthesia is Bethany's hand on my arm. She said, "Count backward from 10. I started counting. I do not remember getting past 7. I woke up at, I would learn later, 11:47 a.m. The surgery had taken 4 hours and 26 minutes. The recovery room was quiet. My mouth was dry. There was an oxygen cannula in my nose. There was a heaviness in my left side that I knew was the absence of an organ I had carried for 39 years. I was disoriented. I was searching the room for Brendan's face. Glenda Briar was the face I found. She was sitting in the chair next to my bed. She was holding a clipboard. She introduced herself. She said her title. She said, "Mrs. Cooper, are you alert enough to talk?" I said, "Where's my husband?" She said, "Mrs. Cooper, your husband asked me to give you this." She held up the manila envelope. I want to say something here about Glenda Briar. I have thought about her many times in the 3 years since. Glenda was a 56-year-old hospital social worker who had been told by my husband to deliver a divorce petition to a woman who had just woken up from major surgery. Glenda had refused. The surgical team had backed her. She had insisted that I be cleared by the anesthesiologist and the surgical nurse before she was permitted to enter the room. She had also, on her own initiative, called the hospital ethics committee chair, a woman named Dr. Frances Loomis, who had arrived at the recovery floor by the time I was awake. Dr. Loomis was sitting in a chair on the far side of the room. I had not noticed her. She was waiting in case I needed her. Glenda did not have to deliver the envelope. She could have told my husband to deliver it himself. She told me later, when I called her 2 weeks after the surgery to thank her, that she had decided to deliver it personally because she did not trust anyone else in the building to do it with the care it required. She said, "Mrs. Cooper, I have been doing this work for 28 years. I have delivered terrible news to a lot of people in hospital beds. I wanted to make sure that when you opened that envelope, the person handing it to you was somebody who knew what was inside." I asked her what was inside. I opened the envelope. The petition was on top. The filing date was that morning at 8:47 a.m., 2 hours and 45 minutes after my surgery had begun. The reason listed was irreconcilable differences. The financial disclosure attached was 12 pages long. There was also a letter in Brendan's handwriting, on a single page of cream-colored stationery I recognized from the desk in his home office. The letter said, "Vera, I know the timing is unforgivable. There is no good time to do this, and I have been waiting for the right time for 2 years, and there is no right time. I needed to do it today because you would not have gone through with the surgery if I had told you yesterday, and Lawrence needs the kidney. He needs it from you specifically because of the match. I am sorry. I have been seeing someone for a year and a half. I will not name her in this letter. I have moved out. My things are gone from the house. I will be staying at a hotel for now. Please do not call me. Please do not come looking for me. The attorney listed on the petition will handle communication. I am sorry for the timing. I am sorry for everything. B." I read the letter twice. Then I read it 3 more times. Glenda waited. Dr. Loomis waited. I do not know how long I sat there with the letter in my hand. The clock on the wall said 12:04. I had been awake for 17 minutes. I had been a divorcee, in spirit if not yet in law, for somewhere around 4 hours. I said, "How is Lawrence?" Glenda said, "Lawrence is in recovery on the 8th floor. The surgery was successful. The kidney took. He is stable." I said, "Does Lawrence know?" Glenda said, "Mrs. Cooper, that is something I would like to discuss with you when you are ready. Not now." I said, "Glenda, did Lawrence know before the surgery that this was happening?" Glenda looked at Dr. Loomis. Dr. Loomis looked at me. Dr. Loomis said, "Mrs. Cooper, I cannot answer that question with certainty, but based on conversations the hospital has been having with Mr. Brendan Cooper and Mr. Lawrence Cooper this morning, the ethics committee has reason to believe that Lawrence Cooper was aware of his brother's plans prior to the surgery." I closed my eyes. I want to pause here, because if you are still listening, you understand what I had just learned. The brother whose body now contained my left kidney had known. He had known before he was wheeled into the operating room. He had known when I had visited him the day before the surgery, when I had sat next to his hospital bed and held his hand and told him that we would all be okay, and he had squeezed my hand and said, "Vera, I will never be able to repay you." He had known then. He had let me put my body on a table for him, knowing that his brother was going to leave me the same morning. If you have ever been asked to give something to someone who already knew they were going to take everything else, drop a comment. I read them. I am asking because I do not know how many of us there are, and I want to know. My mother came into the recovery room at 12:20. Glenda had asked the nurses to call her. My mother saw my face. She did not need anyone to explain. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She took my hand. She did not ask what had happened. She said, "Vera, I am here. You are not alone. Tell me when you are ready." My mother's name is Camille Whitfield. She is 68. She had divorced my father when I was 8. She had raised me alone. She had worked 2 jobs for 12 years to put me through school. She knew what it looked like when a marriage ended badly. She had not asked questions because she did not need to. The envelope on the bed told her everything. I told her in pieces over the next hour. The petition. The letter. Lawrence's awareness. Glenda. Dr. Loomis. My mother listened. She held my hand. When I was finished, she said, "Vera, tonight you are going to rest. Tomorrow we are going to call a lawyer. Today we are going to focus on the fact that you saved a man's life this morning. Even if that man and his brother do not deserve what you gave them. The kidney is in his body. The act is done. You did the right thing. Now we are going to handle the rest of this with the same care you handled that." I said, "Mom, I want to see Lawrence." She said, "Vera, no." I said, "Mom, not now. In a few days. I want to see his face. I want him to look at me. I want to know." She said, "Okay. In a few days." I was in the hospital for 3 days. Lawrence was on the 8th floor for 5 days. I did not see him during my stay. I did not want to. I asked the nursing staff to ensure that Brendan did not enter my room. They did. Brendan did not try. On the 2nd day, I asked the social worker to bring me a notepad and a pen. I wrote down everything I could remember about the previous 18 months. Conversations. Trips Brendan had taken for work that I now suspected had not been work trips. Phone calls he had taken in the garage. Late nights at the office. The ski weekend in February. The conference in Phoenix in November. The 2 weekends in May when he had told me he was visiting Lawrence, who lived 3 hours away, and which I now realized had not added up given Lawrence's dialysis schedule. I wrote 11 pages by the end of the 2nd day. My mother watched me write. She did not interrupt. When I set the pen down, she said, "You are your mother's daughter." I said, "I learned from the best." She kissed my forehead. On the 3rd day I was discharged. My mother drove me home. The house was quiet. Brendan's things were gone. Not all of his things. The framed photos on the wall in the living room had been left. His side of the closet was empty. His side of the bathroom was empty. The home office where he had worked was empty of his papers. The gun safe in the basement, which had held 2 hunting rifles and his late father's pocket watch, was open and empty. The kitchen drawer where we kept the household passwords was empty. The folder in the file cabinet labeled taxes was empty. He had taken the financial records. He had not taken Beckett. Beckett had been at my mother's friend Pearl's house during the surgery, and Pearl had brought him over that afternoon. Beckett met me at the door. He was somehow the most ordinary thing in the house. I sat down on the couch. My mother brought me a glass of water and one of the frozen soups, defrosted. I ate a few spoonfuls. My mother said, "Vera, tomorrow we call a lawyer. Tonight you sleep. I am sleeping in the bedroom with you. I do not want you alone." I said, "Mom, I want to call somebody first." She said, "Who?" I said, "I want to call Glenda Briar." I called Glenda the next morning. I asked her 3 questions. The first was, who was the attorney on the petition? She told me. His name was Roland Mahaffey. His firm was in a city about an hour from us. He specialized in high net worth divorces. The second question was, did the hospital ethics committee have any record of conversations with Lawrence Cooper or Brendan Cooper that I should be aware of in a legal context. Glenda said, Mrs. Cooper, I cannot share details with you informally, but I can tell you that Dr. Loomis is preparing a report for the medical center's risk management team, and that report will be available through legal discovery if you choose to pursue civil action. I would recommend you have your attorney request it. The third question was, did she know professionally of any divorce attorneys who specialized in cases involving family members and medical procedures? Glenda said, Mrs. Cooper, I have a name for you. Her name is Inez Vargas. She is in this city. She has handled 3 cases in the last decade that involved live donor transplants and divorce. She knows the legal terrain better than anyone I have referred clients to. I called Inez Vargas's office that afternoon. Her assistant, a calm man named Drew, told me that Inez had a cancellation Friday at 11 a.m. and that he was inserting me into the slot. He said, Mrs. Cooper, Inez told me to tell you that if you cannot drive yourself due to your recent surgery, she will send a car. There is no charge for this. I told him I had my mother. He said, tell your mother to bring water for you. Inez's office has a fountain, but the water is warm. Inez Vargas was 52, sharp-featured, with reading glasses on a silver chain. Her office had a window that looked at a small public garden. There was a framed photograph on her desk of an older woman I assumed was her mother. She greeted me at the door. She did not shake my hand because I was 3 days post-surgery. She gestured for me to sit on the couch instead of the chair, which she said would be easier on my incision. She had thought about it. She read my 11 pages of notes. She read the petition. She read the letter. She read the financial disclosure. She did not interrupt. When she was done, she set the documents down and she folded her hands. She said, Vera, I want to tell you what I see. Then I want to tell you what we can do. Then I want you to tell me what you want. She listed what she saw. 1. The financial disclosure was incomplete. Brendan had listed his salary, his 401k, the joint accounts, and the mortgage. He had not listed any side income. He had not listed any new accounts. There were several places in the disclosure where Inez would expect, given his job, to see additional accounts or assets, and they were not there. She suspected there was money she could find through subpoena. 2. The timing of the filing was, in her professional opinion, strategically calculated to maximize psychological harm and minimize your ability to respond. She said this carefully. She said most divorces are not filed during a spouse's surgery. She said the filing on the morning of a kidney donation, particularly when the recipient was the filer's brother, was something she had never seen in 22 years of practice. 3. There was a significant question of fraud and undue influence. If Brendan had been planning to file for at least 18 months, as the affair timeline suggested, then he had asked me to be tested for the kidney transplant under fraudulent pretenses. He had asked me to undergo major surgery to save his brother's life while concealing his intent to leave the marriage. The legal term for what he had done was, in some jurisdictions, fraudulent inducement. Inez believed we could pursue this both as a factor in the divorce settlement and potentially as a separate civil claim. For Lawrence's awareness, if it could be established, opened additional questions. If Lawrence had known and had not disclosed, he had benefited from a procedure obtained under false pretenses. This had ethical implications for the transplant program and possible legal implications for him personally. 5. The Hospital Ethics Committee report would be a critical document. Inez would request it through formal discovery. She expected, based on Glenda's involvement, that it would be substantive. She said, Vera, what do you want? I said, Inez, I am not vindictive. I want to be honest about that. I gave Lawrence my kidney because I wanted to. I do not want it back. I cannot get it back. I do not want him to suffer. I want you to be careful with him. He is 42 and he just got a kidney. He is going to be on immunosuppressants for the rest of his life. I do not want to harm him, she said. Understood, I said. But I want the truth. I want everything Brendan has hidden, found, and disclosed. I want a fair financial settlement. I want him to know that he did not get away with what he tried to do to me. And I want the hospital to know what happened, in case there is any procedural change that should be made for future donors. I do not want another woman to wake up from kidney surgery and be handed an envelope. Inez wrote on a yellow pad. She said, Vera, I can do all of that. I said, then let's do it. She said, there is one more thing I want to ask you. I said, what? She said, do you want to talk to Lawrence? I said, yes. I want him to look me in the face. I want to ask him one question. She said, then we will arrange it. Through counsel. With protective conditions. When you are physically ready. Not before. I said, thank you. She said, Vera, drink some water. Your color is fading. I drank water. My mother drove me home. I slept for 16 hours. The discovery process took 5 months. Inez was patient. She was thorough. She was, in her own words, unhurried because the kidney is already in his body and we are not in a rush. She found a separate brokerage account in Brendan's name. The account had been opened 21 months earlier. The balance was $186,000. The seed money had come from a series of withdrawals from our joint accounts that Brendan had attributed, in our shared bookkeeping, to a home renovation fund that had never resulted in any home renovation. She found a lease on an apartment in the city about an hour from us, signed 11 months earlier, in Brendan's sole name. The lease had been used as a return address on several pieces of correspondence with his attorney. The apartment had been furnished, by all evidence, by both Brendan and the woman whose name Brendan had refused to disclose in his letter, and which Inez ultimately obtained through subpoena. Her name was Karina Bell. She was 34. She worked as a marketing director at a competing medical device company. She found a series of credit card charges to a jewelry store, several restaurants, 2 hotels, and a women's clothing boutique. The pattern matched the pattern of an affair conducted carefully over 18 months. She found, and this was the part that mattered most, a series of text messages between Brendan and Lawrence going back 6 weeks before the surgery. The texts had been recovered from a phone Brendan had attempted to wipe but had not wiped completely, after the divorce filing alerted us that there might be evidence to recover. Inez subpoenaed the phone. A forensic technician retrieved the messages. The messages established that Lawrence had known. I will not quote them all. I will quote one. 6 weeks before the surgery, Brendan had texted Lawrence, I'm filing the morning of. I've thought about this for a long time. She wouldn't go through with the surgery if I told her now. She has to do it for you. It's the only way. Lawrence had replied. Are you sure? Brendan had replied. I'm sure. I need her to do this for you and then I need to be done. Lawrence had replied, okay. I won't say anything. That was the message that broke me. Okay. I won't say anything. Lawrence had agreed. He had agreed to let me give him a kidney while knowing that the surgery was being timed to a divorce. He had thanked me the day before the operation. He had squeezed my hand. Inez read the text to me in her office. My mother was with me. I did not cry. I had stopped crying about Brendan 2 months before. The texts about Lawrence were a different kind of cold. I sat very still. I drank some water. My mother held my hand. I said, Inez, I want to see Lawrence now. The meeting with Lawrence was arranged for a Tuesday in November. It took place at Inez's office. Inez was present. Lawrence's attorney, a man named Holcomb, was present. My mother sat in the waiting room. I had asked her to. I wanted to do this alone. Lawrence was thinner than I remembered. His skin had the slight tan yellow tint of a man whose new kidney had taken hold, but who was still adjusting to the immunosuppressants. He sat across from me at Inez's table. He did not meet my eyes when he came in. He sat down. He folded his hands. Holcomb cleared his throat. I said, Holcomb, I would like to speak with Lawrence directly, with you and Inez present. But to him, Holcomb said, Mrs. Cooper, my client has been advised. Lawrence said, Holcomb, it's fine. Let her ask. I looked at Lawrence. I said, Lawrence, I have one question. I am not going to yell. I am not going to cry. I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly. The day before the surgery, when I sat next to your bed and you squeezed my hand and said you would never be able to repay me, did you know? Lawrence looked at the table. He said, Yes. I said, When did you know? He said, 6 weeks before. I said, Why didn't you tell me? He said, Vera, I was dying. I was going to die without that kidney. I had been dying for 2 years. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the whole time. I told myself I would tell you after. I told myself I would do something. I told myself I would make it up to you. I did not know what I would do. I was a coward. I was a sick coward. I said, Lawrence, look at me. He looked up. I said, I gave you a kidney. I cannot take it back. I do not want to take it back. I want you to live. I am not asking you to suffer. I am asking you to know what you did. You let your brother use my body to save your life. You let him plan a divorce around my surgery. You squeezed my hand the day before. I want you to remember that every day for the rest of your life. I want you to know that the kidney inside you came from a woman who trusted both of you and who you both betrayed. That is not a curse. That is the truth. I am giving it to you because I do not want to carry it alone. He was crying. He did not try to hide it. He said, Vera, I am so sorry. I said, I know. I am not telling you to make you sorry. I am telling you because you should know. Take care of the kidney. Take care of yourself. Take your medication. Live a long life. Live with what you did. That is what I am asking you to do. I am not asking you to fix it. You cannot fix it. I am asking you to live with it. He nodded. He was still crying. I said, We are done. I stood up. Inez stood up with me. Holcomb stood. Lawrence remained seated. I walked out of the room. My mother was in the waiting room. She looked up. I shook my head once. We left. I want to pause here for a second. I have thought about that meeting many times in the years since. I do not regret it. I have been told by some friends that I was too kind. I have been told by others that I was too harsh. I think I was neither. I think I was, for that moment, exactly the woman I needed to be. I had given a man my kidney. I had earned the right to look him in the face and tell him what he had done. He had earned the obligation to listen. We did our parts. The rest of his life is his. If you have ever had to look someone in the face and tell them the truth they had been hiding from themselves, drop a comment. I read them. I am asking because I think this is one of the hardest things a human being can do, and I would like to know who else has done it. The divorce settled in March, 8 months after the surgery. The settlement. I got the house. I got 100% of the joint accounts. I got 65% of Brendan's 401k, calculated on the basis of his contribution history during the marriage. I got 100% of the secret brokerage account. I got reimbursement for the household funds Brendan had diverted to it. I got my attorney fees in full. Brendan agreed to a non-disparagement clause and a 5-year non-contact provision. Brendan agreed to pay an additional sum in recognition of the circumstances of the filing, which Inez had carefully negotiated in lieu of pursuing the fraudulent inducement claim in civil court. The amount was substantial. It is the closest thing to an admission that what he did was wrong that I will ever receive from him. The Hospital Ethics Committee report was completed in February. It was a 15-page document. The committee found that the surgical team and the social work team had performed exemplary work in protecting me upon discovery of the petition. The committee also recommended a procedural change. Going forward, all live donors at that hospital would be informed, during the psychiatric evaluation, that any major change in family circumstances by the recipient or the recipient's family within 90 days of the scheduled surgery must be disclosed to the donor. The committee called it the Informed Consent Expansion Provision. Glenda Briar told me, when she called to tell me about the change, that the committee had considered calling it the Cooper Provision. They had decided that would be intrusive. I told Glenda I appreciated the consideration. I have not seen Brendan since the day before the surgery. I have not spoken to him. I do not expect to. The non-contact provision will expire in 2 years. I do not expect to want contact then either. He sent me a card on the first anniversary of the surgery. The card was forwarded to Inez's office, which is the only address he has for me. Inez did not open it. She offered it to me. I told her to throw it away. She did. I have not seen Lawrence since the meeting at Inez's office. He sent me a letter through Holcomb 6 months later. The letter was 3 pages. Holcomb forwarded it to Inez. Inez asked me if I wanted to read it. I said yes. The letter was an apology. It was specific. It included a check for $50,000, which Lawrence said was money he had inherited from his mother, and which he wanted me to have. I gave the check to a charity that funds emergency care for kidney patients without insurance. I told Inez to write Holcomb a note saying the money had been donated in Lawrence's name, and that I did not want any further communication. Inez wrote the note. There has been no further communication. I have learned, through a mutual acquaintance, that Lawrence's transplant remains successful. He has been off dialysis for 3 years. He is, as far as I know, alive and well. I do not begrudge him that. I do not wish him harm. I gave him a kidney. The kidney is doing its job. That is all I asked of it. I sold the house on Whitlow Drive a year after the divorce. I could not sleep there anymore. I bought a smaller house on the other side of town with a fenced yard for Beckett. The lilac bush stayed. I took a cutting and rooted it in a pot, and I planted the cutting at the new house, on the side of the yard that gets afternoon sun. It has bloomed every May for the last 2 years. I went back to editing about 4 months after the surgery. I took on a textbook on transplant immunology, which my therapist told me was either very brave or very on the nose. I told her it was both. The book paid well. The work helped. It still helps. My mother went home to Tucson 8 weeks after the surgery, when I was strong enough to be alone. She comes back once every 2 months. She stays for a week. She brings frozen soup. She does not ask questions I am not ready to answer. She is the reason I am a woman who, when bad things happen, knows what to do. I started a small foundation last year. It is called the Kidney Trust. It provides legal counsel free of charge to live organ donors who suspect they may have been deceived about the circumstances of their donation. We have served 14 people in the past year. Most of the cases have been quieter than mine. One case involved a man who donated a portion of his liver to his father-in-law and discovered, 3 weeks after the surgery, that his wife had moved in with another man. We helped him. He is recovering. The foundation runs on the settlement money from my divorce. I am told by financial advisors that this is unusual. I have told the financial advisors that I do not need usual. Beckett is 12 now. He sleeps next to my bed. He has slowed down. He still meets me at the door. He is the most ordinary, uncomplicated love I have in my life, and I am grateful for him every day. I want to end with this. There is a particular kind of betrayal that uses the body of the betrayed to extract one last act of love. It is, I have come to believe, the worst kind, not because it is more painful than other betrayals, but because it weaponizes the very generosity that defines the betrayed. My husband knew that I would not give the kidney if I knew, so he made sure I did not know. He used my decency against me. He used his brother's life as the cover. He almost succeeded. What he did not understand was that the kidney had already left my body by the time the envelope reached the recovery room. The act of generosity had already been completed. I had already done the thing he had needed me to do. He had used me, but he had not destroyed me. I was on the table that morning, exactly the woman I had always been. And when I woke up, I was still that woman. The kidney was gone. The man was gone. The marriage was gone. I was not. If you are sitting with a decision to give something of yourself to someone who may not deserve it, I will not tell you what to do. I will tell you this. The decision is yours. The act once complete is also yours. Nobody can take it from you even if they tried to. The generosity was real. It belongs to you. They cannot have it. Came from you. It stays with you. I gave a man my kidney. The kidney is in him. The act is mine. I have not regretted it for a single day. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me whether you have ever given something to someone who knew, while accepting it, that they were going to take everything else. Tell me what you carry. I read them. If you know someone who needs this story, a donor, a daughter, anyone who is sitting in a pre-op room being asked one final time if they are giving freely, share this video with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. Thank you for listening. The kidney is doing its work. The lilacs are blooming. Beckett is asleep at my feet. And I am still here. I mean that.